Well, speaking of technological change, we're going to turn now to our cover feature this week, all about quantum computing, an area that's attracted a lot of interest in the past few weeks in particular, in the past year in particular. The interest has been increasing quite significantly for a while now. We'll get on to some timelines in a minute, James, but why don't we talk first of all about some of the developments we've seen recently and also the bigger picture about what this ultimately is all working to and why there is such investor interest in this space at the moment, albeit some of that interest is quite speculative by its very nature, but there are at the same time concrete reasons for excitement at the moment.
Yeah, so quantum computing, it's very much sort of sounds like science fiction. But basically, what's happening recently is we're seeing more and more claims of something called quantum advantage, which is sort of a point at which real world tasks can be done by quantum computers in timeframes that are wholly impractical for classical computers. So, for example, HSBC using a solution developed by IBM, who've been one of the leaders for a long time in developing quantum computing capability, was able to successfully trial an algorithm predicting for fixed income trading, and they were 34% better than classical technology at filling orders, so improving the liquidity in fixed income. So that's a real world use case that potentially could be rolled out. Also, in the last month, Google has with they've got a chip and an algorithm. It's very much a hardware and algorithm combination with quantum computing, as we'll come onto, that was able to analyze subatomic reactions 13,000 times faster than a classical computer. Now, that sounds a bit sort of abstract to a lot of people, but what it could potentially mean is impacts on things like drug discovery, which is obviously a multi-billion-dollar industry, and testing things like space-age materials, which as we sort of explore outer space, as we look for more heat-resistant and conductive materials with energy transition, these are potentially very, very big breakthroughs.
So, as you've alluded to there, the underlying hope for quantum computing is that, or the underlying wish is that we get to a stage where there are practical applications from these computers, which effectively mean that the classical traditional computing power is superseded many times over. And that will, as you just again remarked upon, have all kinds of implications for all kinds of sectors. It's not just a case of doing things faster. It's, in some cases, it would be a case of completely overhauling how things work. One area in particular would be, and we're still very much in the realms of the hypothetical with this, but it would be in terms of encryption and in terms of cybersecurity and things like that.
Well, I mean, this is sort of one of the high threshold use cases, but it's the one that people are most frightened about. Most of the internet is worked on keys, which is based on and encrypted with based on something called RSA, which is I can't remember the names of but that RSA encryption is basically the acronym of the people who developed it. Now, there's been a theoretical algorithm developed by a guy called Peter Shaw about 30 years ago. In 1994, I think he did it, so 31 years ago, but which can theoretically crack RSA encoding, but we've never had the computational power to do it. I mean, it's theoretically possible, but it would take, because a classical computer works in bits, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, the number, they would take it many thousands of years theoretically to crack an RSA encryption. We've got a lot nearer this year to being able to generate the computational power overhead with a quantum computer, theoretically still, but a lot nearer theoretically to be cracking RSA encryption. And that is very exciting and very frightening. We were talking about Marks and Spencers and being hacked at the top of the show. There's a real risk of that hackers who've harvested data from all over the place on the dark web will be able to decrypt it, in the future when they have this technology. So it's absolutely imperative cybersecurity to be prepared for this Q-day moment when quantum can actually break RSA. And actually, on what the good news is that there are algorithms available which can do that protection, and companies like Microsoft and Amazon Web Services are incorporating those. So we should hopefully be ready for it.
Indeed. Well, if that moment comes, there will be quite significant consequences, as you've just outlined. Some people clearly have differing views here, and Some people have changed their views as well, because Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, at the start of this year was saying we were still decades away from this moment of quantum advantage when quantum computers can override or supersede classical computers. But he's moderated his language this year, hasn't he? And some people think, because of the kind of developments that Google are now showing, that kind of thing, that we might be a little bit closer to some of these moments where we are seeing practical applications come through.
The skepticism around actually being able to break RSA, which had actually prompted a bit of short selling of quantum stocks at the start of the year. These guys are getting squeezed quite a bit at the moment, it has to be said. This was born of the fact that there's a high level of overhead in terms of the qubits that need to be developed to apply Shor's algorithm to crack RSA standards. Now, there's been a big breakthrough at Google in terms of the algorithm used in terms of folding the qubits in the reaction to do the calculation. So theoretically, it's gone down from 20 million odd qubits to 1 million. Now, that's still 1,000 times more than a quantum computer can generate. But the direction of travel is clear. And on the hardware side, the stability and something called the fidelity of the quantum computers is also improving by orders of magnitude, which means that we're getting to a stage where we're going to need fewer qubits to do a reaction on the algorithm side and on the hardware side. And there will be a point when this potentially converges, and this really, it's impossible to say when this might be, but it could be 2030, it could be 2035. The point is it's now no longer such an abstract science fiction concept. It means that that the NIST algorithms, the quantum proof algorithms, that's something that cybersecurity firms are going to have to incorporate. People are going to have to assume this might happen.
Yeah, better safe than sorry when you're dealing with such a potentially consequential thing, I think. Let's talk about the tech giants then, because they are making investments in this sector. They've got their fingers in many pies, clearly, but they are taking a greater interest in quantum computing this year or in recent months, NVIDIA included. Part of the reason maybe why the CEO is changing his tune, or chicken and egg situation there. But can we talk a bit about some of those investments and what they're looking at?
Well, we know obviously NVIDIA has very deep pockets and a lot of cash, and NVIDIA's NVentures, sort of effectively their sort of venture capital division, has become a major partner of a firm called Quantinuum, and invest in another number of quantum firms. And they're interested in this technology because it is a perfect partner for AI. If you think about the bottlenecks for AI, their energy and their computational power, because if you're thinking about sort of the amount of thinking an AI has, a large language model has to do in binary bits 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, to us to do complex tasks, that takes a hell of a lot of time and it burns a hell of a lot of energy. Now, with quantum computing, potentially, the prize here is actually to be able to do this in shorter times, shorter pathways. You get to answers quicker. You don't run into the bandwidth you get in some cases with using AI. And also, it's in terms of the power required for the data centers. It's more like, I think I spoke to one analyst who said it's going to be equivalent of a data center which could run off the power of a couple of refrigerators versus a small city to run which is what it could cost in terms of energy to power. And obviously, environmentally, that in terms of water usage, in terms of energy usage, that's one of the big objections people have to AI that could completely disappear. And furthermore, it's when you think about the security issue, when you think about the fact that there's real world economic value in terms of testing in the pharma industry, in the energy industry, in materials and manufacturing. Suddenly, the elusive real world applications, which is possibly one of the reasons around the jitters around some of the AI stock valuations at the moment. Some of that suddenly, we're back to the races again.
Yeah, if of course we get to, if and when we get to that stage in a few years' time, but it's certainly, you can see why it's an enticing prospect for them, as you've just outlined. Let's talk about the quantum computing stocks themselves, though, the smaller companies, US listed, which really have seen a huge run up this year in particular, partly on all the things we've just been speaking about. As you also mentioned, they have sold off a little bit recently, but only marginally in the grand scheme of things. I mean, there clearly is some froth here because these are pre-revenue companies and there is a lot of hope maybe being built into valuations, as happens with early stage companies. But At the same time, clearly a lot of investors are buying into this, and companies too, as we've outlined.
Well, they're not necessarily pre-revenue; they are pre-profit. A lot of them,
Yes.
and their focus is very much on scientific development. But companies, these are mostly listed on the Nasdaq. So it's a US companies. Rigetti, which is up 200%. D-Wave is also a multi-bagger. IonQ up about 50%. IonQ is an interesting one. It's just had a breakthrough with stability of its quantum computing. That relies on a method called trapped ions rather than superconductivity, which is the method that IBM and Google have predominantly used. Although it has to be said, the big firms are investing a lot of other iterations of quantum, so they've got fingers in several pies. But the focus is on scientific development. So you want to look at sales, cash burn, and the ability to raise equity from backers. So it is kind of speculation. So you're kind of following the money to see if they're going to rise. So the thing to count for is things like enterprise value to sales movements in that. Now, obviously, the enterprise value is going to keep going up, but the multiple, the more that big companies like Nvidia and Microsoft and Alphabet are investing in them. But you also want to look at free cash flow, their ability to raise money, and look at trends in cash from operations. Is that improving? But there's some very exciting things. Quantinium, which was it's partly spun out from Cambridge University quantum computing, which is a merger with the quantum division of Honeywell, which is a US listed stock, which you again another US play on it in part. So that the prize for the big investors is as we've said is that quantum could be the secret sauce to sort of scale the AI revolution, so it's kind of that's why they're into it, and you can follow the money if you want to speculate on this, but there's very much an investment for fun money and a very small slice of your portfolio. So it's a fascinating technology. It's just one of part of the joy of investing is sort of that hobby aspect of it, where you get to educate yourself about what's going on in the cutting edge and feel like you've got a bit of skin in the game. This is definitely one of those, but it's definitely a very speculative play, and readers should not commit any money that they can't afford to lose.
Mm. The thing that interests me with some of these share prices this year is they've been, as a momentum and speculative trade in some cases, their prices have been going up almost in tandem with Bitcoin, where if you think about the ultimate consequences, one thing we haven't really spoken about is if we get to that quantum stage, you would break the Bitcoin encryption. It really seems like these are two sectors which should be moving inversely in a way, but maybe that just speaks to the market in general.
Well, quantum-proofed encryption, there are some blockchains that are more capable of adapting to it than others. I mean, I won't ask you to pardon my French, but the term for rubbish coins that rhymes with Bitcoin, those type of blockchains, they'll be easy to crack, and that's just another sort of Dutch tulip speculation that can go badly wrong. Bitcoin, that's something, because it's quite an old blockchain that will have to adapt. One of some things like Solana, that supposedly says it is working on being sort of quantum proof, but again, there is going to be an issue. Blockchains are going to have to think about how they incorporate some of this these NIST technologies, but also quantum will be able to come up with its own defense and algorithms itself. So it's a fascinating space. But yeah, it's something that you should be sort of careful of if you're. But I mean, you shouldn't be speculating tons of money on altcoins anyway. Again, that's a fun money like hobby, really.
Yeah. Well, one thing to wrap up, we should maybe mention it is just you spoke about the team spun out at Cambridge University, and there are some UK quantum startups of varying stripes. One, in fact, was bought by IonQ, Oxford Ionics, I think its name was, for $1 billion earlier this year, and there are others out there too. So the UK is not quite necessarily at the forefront, but certainly part of the forefront of this research. So,
so that if you think about it, there are three main strands. There's private capital, which the US is by far the biggest at raising. But in terms of state, then there's state investment, which actually is led by China. And the Chinese at the start of the year had the most powerful the fastest superconducting quantum computer, I think. Not the most powerful. I think that was still IBM. But they had so the Chinese are big investors, the biggest. The Europeans are actually the second biggest state investors. Obviously, right next door to Russia, Russian hackers. That's a bit of an impetus for them. But the third strand is universities, and the UK was pretty good at that. Unfortunately, we're pretty rubbish at raising money in recent years, and what do we have enough sort of government backing for this, or this type of investment? It's another question. But it's interesting. It's watch this space, because there's about 76 UK companies, I think, private startups in the quantum space, and obviously we've got some developments on the London Stock Exchange, where we will be able to trade off, but on a secondary market, not a primary market, for privately listed stocks. This may be something to watch out for. Again, with some fun money in the coming years.
Well, this is our big read, as I said at the start, and there is a lot of detail in there, a lot of technical detail. If you're interested in finding out more, do take a look online and in print.